Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast or Eastern time zones. Welcome to our webinar on cyber resilience. It's actually the first part on a four-part series, and this part one is how CISOs and Mighty ID think about resilience. We have a special guest today, Troy Wilkinson, a global CISO and a friend of mine. We're going to cover some and have some very good conversations about resilience and what it means. This is again first part of a four-part series. We'll be covering how CISOs think about resilience. Later in the year, we'll be covering other parts. Q2, we'll be covering resiliency considerations for IAM environments. Part three, around Q3, we'll be talking about justifying resiliency investments. And then later in the year, planning your next steps for cyber resiliency. So join us and look out for invites and announcements for those other ones, and we'll have other guests joining us for that one. So, Troy, thanks for joining us.
Mhm.
We're very
Absolutely.
excited to have you. We're going to have a great fireside chat conversation a little bit later in the presentation. Here's a little bit of information about myself. I have about 30 years of security and technology experience. I also served in the Marine Corps in counterterrorism and security roles. After the Marine Corps, I served in senior executive roles at brands like American Express and Early Warning, which is also the makers of Zelle and Pays, which is a digital wallet. And today I work at Mighty ID and I lead the strategy, product, and operations there. Troy Wilkinson is a global CISO. I'll let Troy introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And that's what I love about this industry is that everybody's path to cybersecurity is very diverse and different. And mine started in law enforcement doing IT forensic investigations, and then had the opportunity to serve for our U.S. government overseas out of an embassy doing cyber investigations into all type of terrorism and organized crime investigations. Most recently, a global CISO for a Fortune 500 media and entertainment company, but I've also spent time in healthcare, legal, and travel. So just really enjoy cybersecurity as an industry. And honestly, no matter the vertical, we face the same challenges and we face the same threat actors. And so I like the commonality of that as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that we shared some of that same counterterrorism as a starting point and moving into security from there. This is
That's
going to be a
right.
great conversation, and I really look forward to it because as we talk about the world today, we talk about the all the issues, and especially in the digital age that we're in, the issues around cyber attacks, outages, and it's not just around what companies face and enterprises face. It's also the critical infrastructure such as Microsoft or AWS or anything like that. They face these same issues, and we rely on that critical infrastructure every day. And when we're looking at identity providers, identity is a tier zero application, and everyone relies on that. It's how our customers get access to our products, our services. It's how our enterprise users, you know, get work done. Those identity providers also are facing issues. Just in the last couple of years, you see over half a dozen, at least a half a dozen key security or service issues that have happened. I personally, in previous roles, have faced some of these exact issues you see on this timeline here. And, we had to deal with resiliency problems. What do we do? Did we have to trust the service provider and what they told us, that they had it covered, or, the security problem that they had? It was, everything was good to go. And when you think about what resiliency really means, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we all have to be prepared and we all have to understand where cybersecurity has really started to shift a focus from proactive to more reactive. And the damage and the problems that come out of this as we talk about the security incidents, the data loss, and having the costs and not being prepared for data, disaster recovery or the preparedness of that, complex change management, vendor lock-in. These are all issues and problems that face cyber resiliency, and it leads to things like almost $5 million of a data breach cost, almost $2 million of downtime due to ransomware. $500,000 of unplanned downtime per hour, and even, ransomware payments. So there's not only the downtime due to ransomware, but then there's the payment side of that. And these costs are going up and becoming more frequent for enterprises and businesses day after day. So we're going to talk about cyber resilience. And I think about cyber resilience as some of us are familiar with the concept of assume breach, or the approach of assume breach in your cybersecurity strategy. This is something. Cyber resilience is kind of the sophisticated side of that. You're taking the approach of assuming breach. So what does cyber resilience mean? Well, it really means that we're having the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt to some type of condition, stress, or attack, right? And a subset of cyber resilience is identity resilience, and it's a core component of cyber resilience. And it's for our IAM systems to have very similar capabilities: maintain availability, security, recoverability, scalability, and adaptability in these same types of disruptions and attacks. So the way I like to think about cyber resilience is that space that's in between full operational, normal operations and downtime, complete downtime. And that space in between is resilience. And in today's world, we have to be prepared for and have the ability to operate in that space. And it's a very uncomfortable space to operate in. But if we're not ready to operate in that resiliency space, we're going to be in big, big trouble. Businesses, we've all dealt with downtime, and it's a very uncomfortable place to be. Millions of dollars get lost, identities get stolen, data gets, compromised. So being able to operate in a resiliency space is become more and more of a focus, because it's not a matter of if. You probably heard this, not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So we're going to talk today with Troy about how CISOs think about resilience. But first, you think about, well, why is the resilience important? I touched on some of this already. We talked about it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Cyber attacks, incidents, these are inevitable. It's, again, these will happen. We have to minimize downtime and financial loss. We're going to have problems. How do we minimize that? We have to protect our reputation. We have to maintain customer trust. And that means that when a customer is trying to log in, when a customer is trying to access their data, when they're trying to access our services, that they can get to those things. And so, we have to have compliance with regulations. Regulators are looking more and more at what's your ability to withstand an attack, what's your ability to operate in the face of issues. Today, cloud and SaaS dependencies are more pervasive than ever. We rely more and more on these cloud services and connections, yet we don't control them. So how do we deal with resiliency when we have cloud services and SaaS services that are critical to our operations? We have to reduce the impact of ransomware, data breaches, and the operational issues that happen every day. Is that space in between? How do we reduce that impact? How do we operate? And then, because the threats are becoming more and more sophisticated, no matter how preventive our cyber security programs are, our capabilities are at detecting and preventing all the threats that are out there, they're becoming so sophisticated that something's going to get through. Things are going to happen. So we have to be able to operate in that space that something's going to happen. How do we deal with it? How do we operate in a resiliency moment? So the CISO's perspective. Now we're going to get to some fun discussion with Troy. Okay, so we're going to have the fireside chat with Troy. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to be talking with Troy. I have some questions for him. I'm going to ask, if you guys have any questions, go ahead. There's a Q&A box in the webinar here. Go ahead and put those questions in there. And after we get through the discussion that Troy and I have, we'll ask some of your questions to Troy too. So if you got questions along the way, go ahead and add them into the Q&A box now or anytime you have them, and we'll try and pick them up at the end. So Troy, what did you think about the resiliency kind of pep talk I just gave here at the beginning? What's your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, I think you stole my thunder and took a lot of my talking points away there. I didn't have a chance to review those slides before today. So, no, I think you really hit on a lot of the big topics that we talk about. The transition from reactive to proactive and from proactive to resilience is a big discussion. I think we'll touch on some of the questions you may have, but I think the slides were spot on. I think that some of that is, we've heard it 1,000 times, but until you've actually gone through a crisis, you don't feel that pain. And so preparedness and resilience, building that ahead of time is so important. You don't want to be trying to build resilience or build a plan when you're in the middle of a crisis. And I've seen that so many times with my peers, my friends, companies. We talk to them after they've had a breach or after something is going wrong and the fire alarm's going off. You don't want to be fighting a fire when you've never fought a fire before and the alarm's ringing and nobody knows what to do. So we'll
Absolutely.
go there.
Great. So let's jump right in. So our first question that I wanted to ask you is the role of the CISO. How have you seen it evolve and change in the recent years with this shift from prevention, the focus on cybersecurity and prevention to being one more of, or not more of, but inclusive and a little bit more focused more recently on resilience?
Yeah, I think the CISO role has totally evolved over the last 20 years. It's the newest kind of C-level position in a company, and really because of the number of breaches that we've had and the public attention that they get, the CISO is getting a lot more respect from, let's say, the C-level CEOs, CFOs, and also the board of directors when we're being asked to really finally come sit at the big kids table, as they call it. But I think that this position evolved out of the information technology department, out of the CIO's department. This was handled as part of InfoSec. It was then now into cybersecurity. Now it's CISO. So I think that the CISO role is still evolving, and I think that we're still trying to build the practice for the folks that are coming up into those new CISO roles. We have people like David Taberski here at the Win, who's been in role for 16 years. That's unheard of. Most CISOs are 3 to 5 years in their role, then they move on. And the reason for that is, burnout and all of the different cyber attacks and scapegoating and all the things that kind of go into that. So CISOs have a very, big mantra to go out and fix. And so there's a lot of stress. And so you do see burnout. You do see, these attacks that just don't stop. The threat actors are working 24/7 and they just need to be right once, where we have to be right all the time. So as we have transitioned, as you mentioned, from just the typical spreadsheets and prevention, like how do we stop cyber attacks? Now we have to realize that resilience is really the only way. There was a thought several years ago that we could stop cyber attacks, that we could prevent them, that we had a silver bullet somewhere, whether it's a firewall or something that we could put around our castle and we were safe. And we've found out, the whole industry's found that that's not possible. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You said that earlier, but it is true, right? We know that we are going to have a breach or an incident that escalates. So resilience is absolutely the only way to make sure that you can operate in times of crisis. And that means preparation. Some things that people don't think about is having your incident response plan printed. We all work remote now. Most of my SOC was remote across the United States. And I made sure that they had a printed copy of our incident response plan, because when the computer systems go down, you can't get to your Teams or SharePoint site to get your incident response plan. People rely on that digital copy all the time. You might have an issue on your laptop itself where it dies. It may be infected and you can't get to that incident response plan. So, there was having things like that on paper, having a call tree, making sure you had everybody's phone number written down on a piece of paper that you printed. It's the little things that really you don't think about in a time of crisis, but you certainly need. And then the second thing would be definitely practice, practice, practice. We did tabletops every year. We did an executive tabletop with our CEO at a Fortune 500 every other year, and our board every other year as well. And so, putting them through that stress, understanding what the CISO is going to be dealing with when that crisis happens is so important for when it actually does happen. And then the last thing I'll mention is just those partnerships with privacy and legal, so that when you are going through that crisis, you have another set of eyes or ears on that crisis call that is listening for the things you might not be thinking about, such as geographic jurisdictional privacy issues, data, loss issues, and who the notification policy is. Is it 24 hours, 48 hours, 76 hours, whatever. And so it's just building those relationships and bridges before the crisis is super critical. And then, going back to the relationship with your CEO and your board and having that seat at the big table, letting them know that, we are going to go through crisis. You're going to have to trust me, and we're going to have to practice this because, I've seen a lot of my peers who do not have that support from the top, who really struggle when things go bad. Myself, on the other hand, and others have a really good relationship with our leadership, and we can sit in that room no matter how bad the crisis is and very quickly get to the bottom of what needs to be done next.
Yeah, those are really good pieces of advice and perspective. One of the things that you mentioned that I've found interesting is the ability to not only practice but truly test. A lot of
Hmm.
times people think about red team penetration tests and active penetration tests that will detect, allow you to test your detection. Do you
Hmm.
find it? Do you see it? But do you really truly test your ability to be resilient? It's not just an annual, BCDR test where you maybe pull out a procedure, you test your recall tree, you test a
Hmm.
couple things. Are you really able to test resilience? And I think that's something that CISOs are starting to think about is how do we test resilience and how do we uh, practice resilience. It's not just the ability to have IT respond to an operational issue. That's something that I think is going to become something that CISOs need to start thinking about is a resiliency plan that they can test and practice, not
Hmm.
just a disaster recovery plan, because resiliency is in the moment and operational and working. So that you bringing that testing plans up is something that I think is really, really important. The next
Yeah, I
question
think it's
I have is, sorry, go ahead. You were going to say,
before we move on, I was just going to say, I think it's important to call out to that point is your command and control training, right?
right,
An incident can be a cyber incident, and it can also be a physical security incident. It could also be an IT incident, an outage like in Microsoft. And so what we practiced our command and control training of who's in control of that incident and how do we delegate tasks. And, having that pre-canned training where the new folks that come on understand that, if the CISO is in command and control, whatever they ask you to do, whether it's an IT function or a legal function or something in an operational physical security function, you're going to go
right,
do it as if it was your boss, right? At a time of crisis, you don't need to be having chain of command or delegation issues. And
right,
so that practice, real world practice is
right,
so crucial. And then the second part of that is bring in an outside facilitator. We found that when we try to do an internal tabletop, people don't take it as seriously as if you have an outside counsel or some type of a facilitator that is professional, has done this
right,
before, and calls on you, puts you on the spot, and really rattles your cage. That's what
right,
you need because that's what's going to happen during crisis.
right. Right. I'll add one more point. Even to the point where you're testing tactical pieces of being able to restore or take tactical steps on the fly with your real systems or real data,
Hmm.
right? Sometimes when you're in those testing scenarios, it's just paperwork. But being able to actually use systems or data in the resiliency tests is just as important because you're testing your data, your systems in the moment. So I think we've talked really in depth about that piece, and there's a lot of good info for the audience here, and we could probably just talk about that piece all day long. So, but we've got some other questions, and I want to jump on those too. So the next question is, and we probably touched on some of this. So if it's a little, if there's anything more to add onto this one, or we can move on to the next question. But to you, what does true cyber resilience mean for the modern enterprise?
Great question. I think there is some overlap with what we talked about, but I think that this is truly perspective, right? So you mentioned the BCDR testing every year, right? Just testing, do your systems work? Can you fail over? Does the internet continue to work? That's recovery from a backup and recovery perspective. True resilience is you test your team, your technology, and your process. You mentioned a bit about the red teaming, the purple teaming, where you're using an attack simulator to go in and say, here's an attack type. Did we see it? Did our systems see it? Did our people see it? Did our process see it? Mapping that back out to MITRE as an example, you can find those threats and indicators that you could go back and fill with the capital expenditure. But does your team understand their role on escalations as an example? Are you escalating the right things? What we find with those purple teams is that we're sending in, different types of attacks, and they're not being escalated quickly enough, or they're not being taken seriously enough. So really understanding what the escalation tree should look like versus what it does look like in real life. So as you mentioned, using real systems, real people, real process, and then really judging yourself from an outside perspective with, I use a project manager for mine, but we basically break it down by section. Did we see it? Did we record it? Did we act appropriately? And go back to finding a way to fix those things. Maybe it's additional training, maybe it's a technology that you don't have to fill that gap, or maybe we need to look at our processes and relook at our incident response plan or our command and control training as an example.
Right, right, exactly. Great perspective. Even to the point where you're testing very, very specific compromise scenarios. Like here's the scenario where uh, a your identity platform was compromised. What would you do in the resiliency process? What would you do to recover from that?
Mhm.
That's an actual test that you could run as part of your incident response in a resiliency program, right? So those are ways that you can do that too. Anything else you wanted to add on this question?
Yeah, I think that the CrowdStrike outage last year is a great example of this, right? We cannot predict which technology could fail. That could have just as easily been Microsoft. It wasn't a cybersecurity failure. It was a update failure, right? And
Right.
so there was an outage due to that software, and that could have been SAP, it could have been Salesforce, it could have been anything. Resilience means that your team understands what it means to get back to business as usual. And we have to understand that cybersecurity and IT serve a function, and that is to make sure the business can make money, and you're there to support the business. And resilience truly means that no matter what happens, the building burns down, the data center is offline, whatever it is, that your team knows what they can do to get the business in the best position to function while
Right.
this outage or this problem is happening and get back to, business as usual as soon as possible.
Right, 100% agree. It's like what I said earlier. It's that space between normal operations and completely down, and it's being able to operate in that space, not letting it go to completely down, and then taking it back to normal operations.
Exactly.
Great. Next question. What key metrics should security leaders track to measure resilience?
CISOs love dashboards, right? And there's a ton of metrics that go into showing us our resilience, and that is, how long does it take for us, to get back up and running? And what I really love to have is an application inventory of all of my critical applications, whether they're internal or external or SaaS, and I rank them. My top one is probably my HR and payroll systems, and then you just move your way down depending on your legacy enterprise applications. But whatever that ranking is and whatever that return to normal time frame should be, just judging yourself based on the metrics of how quickly you can get those back up. Now that seems like a BCDR challenge and metric. However, this is the resiliency. If application one is down, what's our contingency plan? What can we do? And we actually map this out where, if we can't get to our payroll system, we can write hand checks. We can write, checks to employees, and we do this, and here's who's responsible for that, and you practice that. Whatever the system is, being able to map out your contingency plans for if that system is unavailable for whatever reason, that's a good way to measure how quickly you can go from fully automated electronic version to offline mitigating circumstances version. So there's a couple of metrics there, but I would really focus on, returning to regular service, and how quickly you address, challenges.
Right. Mean time to recovery, meantime, yeah. It's interesting about what you said there around going to manual processes. And it made me just think about a lot of times we don't always think about that connection with the business from a security or even IT operations, and knowing that what what business processes are being supported, and if there's a disruption to those, how does the business still operate? What business processes can they switch to,
Mhm.
right? If there's automated technology processes impacted. That's a really, really critical thing to think about, even as security and technology practitioners, for us to think about that and bring that to the table also. That's really interesting perspective. Let me move on. I did have a question come up from someone on the webinar here. I'm going to ask that. What skills do you believe are most critical for aspiring security leaders? And let's put this into context of resilience. What
Oh,
skills?
that's a great question, and I totally encourage people to build their soft skills, to build their delivery under pressure and stress. Because what happens is we find that the first thing to break are people, and we try to mentor and lead people, and folks are book smart sometimes, but when it comes to crisis, they don't know what to do. It's like they've never been put in a position before where they have to make a decision very quickly. Time is of the essence, and they've got people from different departments pushing down on them. So as a good leader, number one, people are the most important part of any cybersecurity program, period. And whether that's up or down, your boss, making your boss look good, or supporting the people that work for you. I would say to any aspiring, security leader who's coming up through the ranks, focus on people, and you will always be in a good spot, because no matter what happens, the industry is going to evolve, technology will evolve, and threat actors will evolve their threats, but the people remain the same. So I love to invest in trainings for my staff, making sure that they have enough work-life balance, making sure that they're, taking time away when they should, because, we have tremendous amounts of vacation in this industry, and people use 1 or 2 days a year, which is crazy. You have to get away, you have to decompress, and you have to get rid of it, because we're under high amounts of stress every single day. And so, just focus on people, and I think that you'll be, very well off to move up the ranks, because you're seen as a people leader, and that can apply to so many different positions within cybersecurity. The hard skills will come. You'll learn the job. You'll learn, whatever the role is that you have at your company. But the soft skills of showing up, being a leader, and supporting your people, you can't train that. So if you have that, and if you can hone that, continue to do so. That's amazing.
That's great advice. I liked where you started off too, and it fit right in. It's resiliency too,
Hmm.
right? Stress under pressure, being able to lead your people in a positive way
Hmm.
under pressure and in pressure environments. I've seen this too in my career as a practitioner prior to coming to Mighty ID, being on multiple incident bridges and security incidents and things like that. You see the people who shy away and almost hide or don't want to be around when the incident's happening versus the people who have to be present and taking a leadership position. And it's a very stressful thing. And I would agree with you to the person who asked that question is, build that resilience, understand that it's not personal towards you. It's you have to step up and be present and take a leadership position and lean in those moments. And not only for yourself and for the company, for the people around you. They need to see that. So great advice, Troy. Let me move on to the next question. The next question, with identity at the core of cybersecurity. Yeah, I've read many statistics on this, that something around, and I know we all know that statistics get made up on the spot, so please forgive me, I'm not making it up. But I have read things around this, that a high percentage, somewhere around 70 to 80% of security incidents and hacks happen through an identity vector. So with identity at the core of cybersecurity, we all know that passwords and keeping identities secure and so on and so forth is a very, I would say, core facet of security. How should companies rethink their IAM strategy to enhance resilience?
Oh, that's a huge, huge question. Actually, I'm in a working group where we're writing a paper on identity this morning with companies like Salesforce and others, trying to redefine this, because identity is one of the biggest, challenges for every single organization. We saw a statistic this morning that said identity continues to be top of mind for every CISO. So the number one investment, so the number one deployment of capital, the number one startup out of Israel or the US is around identity, because we haven't solved this issue. It's a challenge across the board. We have all types of different parts of identity. You have the workforce identity, you have identity governance, you have privileged access management, you have non-human identities like service accounts, and now we have AI chatbot identities, right? So you have agentic AI identities that are going to be so challenging. So imagine your co-pilot's identity. Imagine the things that come out of ChatGPT as an identity in your employment. These things are huge challenges. And honestly, with SaaS applications sprawl, you have so many applications that your employees are using that have an identity? Who's administering that? Let's say Salesforce as an example. Who's your Salesforce administrators? How many employees do you have that are on Salesforce? And if they are terminated, how quickly can you revoke their access to Salesforce? Is it part of your termination process? So if you can imagine all these different facets of identity, you have companies that fill a niche here, 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 and you have to kludge it together. And then you have your single sign-on, your federated identities, et cetera, from Microsoft or Ping or whatever it is. And making them all work together is a challenge. And then add on top of that, every company on this call and every company in the world has legacy enterprise applications. Something built in 1972 by a guy who's no longer at the company, and you have no idea what's going to happen if we change that password or if we remove that role from that application. And so it's just, number one, it's a challenge. Number two, it's a huge risk. Threat actors are taking advantage of this all the time. I'll use the fish tank example here in Las Vegas at a major casino. Iran was able to hack in through a thermometer in a fish tank because it had a, regular username and password that was not changed. And so, identity continues to be the Achilles heel of all of our breaches. 85% of them come from an identity attack. And then also, number one, investment, and also the number one that's the most difficult to solve. And so I think that identity is top of mind for all of us, Chris. And we could go down this rabbit hole for hours, but it's going to continue to be top of mind.
I agree. I think having been on the practitioner side and having IAM teams being responsible for IAM teams, a couple things I think about is IAM has always kind of been a little bit of a stepchild, whether it's hovered between IT and security. And I think one of the things companies need to think about is that it's a very serious, important part. It needs to be elevated in that sense. That's one thing I would say. Another thing is like what you said, there's going to be the sprawl of tools. They need to have a cohesive strategy around what they're going to do with securing IAM. And that includes, everything, not only all the things you mentioned, but the resiliency side of it, right? These things are critical. So how are you going to cover the resiliency of your IAM solutions? So and making sure that they have the right talent and skill set and people around it.
That's
Again,
right.
I've seen these teams be completely understaffed, and they need to be staffed appropriately. One more point that you made that I've also seen is companies are starting to treat everything as a type of identity. You talked about AI chatbots. They talk about even systems, objects, anything like that is essentially an identity in their environment. So it's almost becoming a little bit of like, um, asset management to a degree, right? So there's a little bit of merging there. So their IAM strategy and their asset management strategy start to have touch points that you need to think about, as well as secure, so you know what's in the environment. That's the last thing I'll say about that. So let's move on to the next question. I have another question from the audience here. It says, what percentage of your cyber budget should be invested in prevention versus resilience? Boy, that's a little bit of art and science, I think. What are your thoughts on that, Troy?
Yeah, every CISO is different on how they plan their budget cycle, but what we do is we use our purple team to identify those gaps in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and then we, look at ways to deploy capital to fill those gaps. And so, there's no real numbers, in my opinion, on what should be preventative versus resilience. But I do think that it should be part of your strategy. And having the team, as you mentioned, having the people around it to run it is the only way to have a successful IAM strategy or any resiliency strategy is the people who manage it. I actually hired a guy who's the director of strategy and innovation, and his entire job is to take every tool that we purchase and fully operationalize it, meaning that we're getting everything that we paid for. Every feature is turned on. All the KPIs and metrics from that tool are coming back into me as the CISO, so I can see what my return on investment is. And so those kind of things help me decide which ones I can cut and which ones I need, that are doing good work for us. And I think the same thing applies to, this percentage between prevention and resilience. And unfortunately, we have to spend a lot on prevention, your firewalls, your email security, and so on. But at the same time, you want to build that resilience and, have those services, as I mentioned, outside counsel coming in, do your tabletops, building, exercises in for your SOC and things like that. And the number one thing about all of this technology is you want to have that telemetry in your SIM or wherever you have your data lake so that you can apply artificial intelligence to it and tie those indicators of compromise together to find that investigative timeline. The only reason we have a job is to, stop bad guys and get them out of our systems faster. And so I think that, doing that with data at scale and at speed is so crucial.
That's great. I think I agree with you 100%. You said something at the beginning around, it's different for each CISO and each company. And I think it starts with that threat assessment, that risk assessment, because it depends on the maturity of where they're at. If they're already very strong in their preventive side, maybe they need to invest more in the coming years on their resilient side, or vice versa, or maybe it's a little bit of equal. So it really depends on where they are in that journey. So that's a good perspective and good feedback, Troy. Let me move on to the next question. Let's see here. Next question: how can organizations ensure that their IAM systems are resilient to insider threats and breaches? So just drilling down a little bit more on IAM.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one, and most people don't want to believe that somebody at their company could do something nefarious, right? But we saw the Tesla employee who was trying to, be a persuaded to put malware in on the systems there. And we've seen disgruntled employees or a disgruntled admin taking advantage. So with this one, it's really about data and creating those baselines of what your employees should be doing. And when you see them, deviate from that, especially in the middle of the night or, doing accessing data they shouldn't access, it is so crucial to be able to see that, first of all, and to act on it, second of all. And I have to say, goes back to kind of the art again, because you have to have a great relationship with your HR and your legal department, because as you start talking about monitoring your employees, it gets close to the line of privacy, and then employees have privacy, and depending on where they are, whether France or Germany, you can't even look at their computer, so. There's a lot of things to be cognizant of here, but I would just say that every decision around insider threat has to be made based on real data. Don't be discriminatory. Don't think about who that person is. Don't think about you have to say, that's not normal for their job. We should look into it. And then you bring in, we have actually an insider investigation department. It's not part of CISO, it's part of legal, thankfully. So if we have something like that, we say, here's the data, here's what we believe is happening, go take a look. And so it takes it out of the CISO's hand. But at the same time, how do you prevent that? The identity or the IAM strategy is the first indicator, because they're accessing data they shouldn't. They're accessing the systems at a time that they shouldn't. They're accessing servers that they shouldn't. So identity is the key to all of this. And I go back to telemetry and getting it into a central place so that you can analyze that data at scale, no matter what tool you use. I'm not advocating for a tool. I'm advocating for data. Put it into a data lake or wherever you store your data in a SIM so that you can analyze that data with some type of analytics that are going to tell you what's normal and what's not normal.
Right, I totally agree. And in specific to your IAM systems, people who have access to those particular systems, knowing that who's accessing them, what they're doing, are they doing something suspicious or changes being made outside of certain timeframes, just like what you said, is the logging able to pinpoint it? Are they able to trace that down to a specific user, patient zero, when that happened? And maybe even can something be quickly reverted or easily reverted, and that change be reverted before someone can make any more harm, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
do anything. Some of those capabilities are out there. I know, for us at MightyID, we have capabilities like that can detect and revert those types of changes. Though, but it's super important to have that ability to see it and detect it and respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And the number
Brother,
one the number one insider threat, if I may, before we change this, people taking data and leaving the company, going to a competitor, happens in every industry, happens at every company. So that identity accessing data, and you start seeing data fly out the door or being put on a thumb drive or onto a hard drive, that's a number one indicator that somebody's about to leave and they're going to take company secrets and intellectual property with them.
Yep, agreed. So you got to make sure you have controls on that data and you can see where it's going.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got through most of our questions here. I know I've taken some questions already from the audience, and I'm just taking a break here to see are there any other questions that we might have from the audience. Uh, Feel free. While we're waiting for that, You did bring up a point earlier, Troy, that I wanted to touch on. You talked about having someone on your team that is focused purely on operationalizing the technology, making sure you're getting
Mhm.
the full use out of that. You know, the perspective that I've had on that, I see a lot, and I've been in positions too where, you know, you end up buying a lot of technology and you know, you don't always get it fully implemented, right? And
Mhm.
how
Exactly.
do you get all of that use out of it? And you end up leaving yourself out there with a lot of different capabilities, not fully utilized. From a resiliency standpoint, you know, what do you think that ends up doing? How does that end up you know, weakening or putting someone in a worse position from a resiliency standpoint? Any thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
absolutely. I think that, we call it shelfware. You buy something, it sits on the shelf somewhere, or even worse is when it's half implemented, right? We've seen things where a technology implementation, let's take an ERP system as an example, huge lift. And as you try to implement such a large project, you miss things and you leave stuff half configured, or you have an API connection for testing, but you leave it open to the world because you forgot it was there. So I think that, having somebody to kind of follow up and clean up and sweep under the covers there, under the rugs, is the key to protection and resilience, stopping attacks that, just accidentally been left open. But at the same time, somebody who understands the tools that we've implemented and their function so that when we have an outage or an application outage or a hard downtime or an attack, they can come in and tell us this is where those applications are and how they work and the things they should be doing that they may not be doing. So it's kind of both preventative and resilience. But also at the same time, it prevents, you've invested in all these amazing things. Let's make sure that we're using them for those functions.
So if there's a company or someone that can't dedicate someone to doing that, what would be
Mhm.
your next best kind of way to avoid those deployment pitfalls?
Yeah, I think we do it all. I think we all do it anyway. I think we all kind of go through and try to figure out we bought a tool, what does it do? What should we see from it? I think that, I was able to fortunately get somebody in that position to do it full time. But if not, then I'm sure that whoever is running that tool for you, like let's say it's a endpoint detection and response tool, that team that monitors it are the ones that are going to have to be responsible for, am I getting all of my bells and whistles turned on that I should? Are we, cleaning up all the open APIs? Those things are crucial, and I think that cleanup is necessary. Then you can always rely on third parties. Bring in a MightyID or a Tavora as an example to say, hey,
Right.
and we've got all this stuff here. Can you just double check it that we've done it right?
You know, excellent. I mean, when I was a practitioner, one of the things I valued is when my vendors would come in and regularly update me or tell me, hey, you're not getting the most out of our tool. Some didn't
Hmm.
care. They were like,
Yeah.
hey, we sold it to you. You're great. I know for us, Mighty ID, we're really concerned about making sure our customers are getting the most value out of our tool. And we want to work with them and tell them. I think that's one good sign of a vendor partner, right? But like what you said, whether you get a third party
Hmm.
or you know, an assessor or even maybe another group inside the company that can come in and help assess those things. That those things can go a long way. You just got to think about different ways outside the box to do that. So another question that came in, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about cyber resiliency today?
Mm. So misconceptions is that we're safe. No, we're never going to have a breach. Those kind of
That's
things.
number
People
one,
think
yeah.
that we can, prevent everything, and especially
Mhm.
the smaller the business, the more that kind of happens. I used to work with small businesses and medium enterprises a long time ago, and they just thought, hey, that's never going to happen to me. I'm not a target. I don't have anything of value. Those are the big misconceptions. And then all of a sudden they're hard down and they've lost all the data that's important to them. So I think that's a big misconception. But also, I think that the misconception is the difference between resilience and recovery. Okay, they're two very big different things. Being resilient means that you can get punched in the face and stand back up. Recovering means that you can fall down and get taken to the hospital and you get better. That's a huge difference. Being resilient means you're able to go through that crisis day in and day out, no matter what's thrown at you, no matter how bad it is, no matter what it is. You've got the team, the talent, the process to get through it, and the partnerships are already built and you're ready for it. It's just so interesting to me that I see these people who come into a crisis and they're not prepared. They don't know what the incident response plan is. They don't even know where it is or if you even have one. And then they're like, what do I do? Where do I put my hands kind of thing? They can't log in anything because it's hard down. They just don't know what to do. It's like a deer in the headlights. It's very interesting. So biggest misconception for me would be the difference between resilience and recovery.
Yeah, I 100% agree. One of the ways I like to think about it too is the days of, DDoS attacks, and those are still, out there today, but being able to absorb those things and not let it take down your business is an example of being resilient, where you can absorb it and it doesn't take down your operations, doesn't take down your website, or doesn't take down your payment systems, or doesn't take it down. That's an example of being resilient. Like what you said, being able to get punched in the face and just stand there and take it, right? You're
Hmm.
not getting knocked out. So,
Exactly.
and I think too many companies do think it's not going to happen to me, and they put it in a budget and it gets taken out, or they make it a priority to look at it, and then it gets taken away, and what I also see is the shiny object is what gets all the attention. Everyone's chasing AI and everyone's looking at AI, and those are very important initiatives,
Hmm.
absolutely important initiatives. They have the opportunity to transform what business gets done. They have the ability to transform security. They have the ability to transform the threats that we're facing also. So those are
Hmm.
things that we need to be very serious about, but they end up getting a lot of attention, and then you forget about things like resiliency. But you also have to think about it that if AI has the ability to create a big threat for us from a security standpoint, we also have to think about how do we build the resiliency to face those threats, right? So
Hmm.
it's interesting how those things just kind of get overlooked and forgotten about, or you're chasing those types of things. So it's interesting perspective. Okay, so I think that's it for the questions that we've received today. So Troy, I just want to
Hmm.
thank you again for your time. It's been fantastic speaking with you. I'm going to jump ahead here and wrap up the slides. Um, and really what we're looking for. Well, hold on. I think we see one that just jumped through here. Maybe I'll try and squeeze this one in. Thinking about the differences between resilience and recovery, there's also a big difference between security and compliance.
Yeah,
Can
amen.
you touch on how IAM solutions like MightyID might help with compliance? Okay, so this is kind of a question that came to me about compliance. So I'll take that one.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
okay, so real quick, so how MightyID might help with compliance. So, really what MightyID, from what we do in helping customers be resilient in our solutions in the way of backup and recovery and failover, and how we help customers become compliant, is that it's allowing them to have the ability to recover with their IDP from issues, from problems, from cyber events, and anything like that. And when you look at what external auditors and people that are doing these compliance evaluations, whether it's the government or whether it's some other compliance body, they're looking for resiliency more and more today, and they're looking to see any type of third party service that you're using, whether it's a SaaS product or anything like that, AWS, anything like that. How are you from the shared accountability model able to support your end of availability and recoverability of that service? And so what MightyID does is we allow you to back up and recover your identity platform from any type of failure or any type of resiliency availability issue. So whether something like your Okta or your Entra or Ping platform has a resiliency problem, or whether you have someone who gets into that platform and you need to recover from it, or even if you want to fail over between two different platforms in a severe type of failure moment, we help you do that. And so what compliance bodies are going to be looking for is, do you have the ability to do that, to protect and recover from that kind of capability? And expecting that your identity provider is going to do that is not going to be enough. So we'd love to talk to you more about that. We'll have some information at the end of this presentation, where you can get a hold of us, and we'll look for more on that.
And Chris, if I could add, compliance is not security, right? You can be absolutely compliant and still have a major attack. And we see it all the
Right.
time. These
Right.
headlines in the news, these companies were compliant with some regulation, And so checking a box does not make you secure. And I actually own compliance as well, thankfully, but I make sure that I treat cybersecurity and protection and resilience much differently than I do compliance. Compliance is checking a box. We got to make sure that we're doing what the auditors are looking for, but in no way do I equate that to my security program, my resiliency program, or my cyber security operations program.
Right. Great add in there. Thanks for adding that, Troy.
Mhm.
So today, what are we taking away from here? So there's a checklist that Troy put together here around what we want to take away from here. So the first thing is really, does leadership view cyber resiliency as a core business function, right? He mentioned that earlier, and you got to have that connection and that buy-in. It's not just an IT issue. It's not just IT responding to things. Is it a core business function? The other thing I heard was that, are you proactively identifying and mitigating risks before they become an incident? So that's great if you have cyber resiliency, but you got to have that risk mitigation. You got to have that proactive stuff up front. Does your organization have the support and capabilities to operate effectively during and after attack? So again, this is the proactive side. Do you have the incident response side? Do you know what you're doing after an attack? Do you have that whole process? Do you have the people in place? Number four is kind of one of my favorite ones, because it really shows how mature can you be in a cyber resiliency moment. How transparent to the business can your response be to a cyber attack? Right? So Troy talked about earlier about, well, we can fall back to manual processes if we needed to, right? And we have that mapping and understanding. But can we detect and respond and be in that resiliency moment, but do it in a way where it has the minimal amount of impact to the business operations? That's a very mature response. And that's something that CISOs really want to strive for, is the least amount of business impact in a resiliency moment. That means you're really operating. It's when we talked about taking a punch in the face, that means you're just standing there taking a punch in the face and not even moving or reacting or anything. And then is your culture, is your workforce and culture, not only are you doing, the phishing exercises and all that other stuff, right? The kind of proactive stuff, but do they know how to not only prevent, but respond? Do they know what to do in a resiliency event? And that's not just your incident response team. Do your IT team members know? Do some of your key business members know? Like, some of your business leaders know what's going to happen in a resiliency moment, right? So those things are all key takeaways that I take away from Troy when I hear him talk about the things we did today. So this is a checklist that uh, I would give to all of you here on the call. Use it as a starting point for you to move forward in resiliency. Troy, was there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Oh, my favorite saying is cybersecurity is a people sport. Support your people, support yourself. And of course, my LinkedIn is open to everybody here. I'd love to connect and stay in touch as well, Chris.
Yep. Awesome. Mine's on there too. It was I'll page back up here just a little bit so people can see it if they want to zap it with their phones. So feel free to connect with us directly on LinkedIn and reach out to us. And if you want to learn any more about MightyID, you can reach out to me. You can also reach us at MightyID at sales@MightyID. I'm going to right there. You can zap us for a free resiliency analysis, or contact us at sales@MightyID.com. And thank you for joining us today. Troy, again, it was great speaking with you as always. It's not the first time and it won't be the last time. And together, let's make it mighty. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.